Research reports. What are ways that you're seeing it being done wrong right now?
They have selective reporting. A research project really exists to surface the truth. It's to test a hypothesis. But what happens is a lot of times brands put out these reports that kind of feel too good to be true. How could every single finding come back in this company's favor?
Erin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Justin. I'm happy to be here.
Fun fact about you that I have not shared with you, that there's like a list of 30 to 50 people on LinkedIn that I enable all notifications just to kind of stay in the loop. And you're on that list. And so I wanted to have you on because we're going to talk about some fun stuff today about research reports. But before we dive in, can you kind of give us an idea of what your claim to fame would be?
Well, I am the only Erin Balsa on LinkedIn. So that's my claim to fame. But more specifically in the content marketing space, I would say that in 2021, I launched a course called the Research Report Playbook, where I started to teach other marketers and content marketers how to create original research reports. And I have since, helped hundreds of marketers and content marketers create better reports.
And that's what I'm excited to dive into is the report area of what you do, because it's actually something I've been thinking about for my own business. But let's dive in. Erin, research reports. First of all, gut reaction to that is like, that sounds like a really big job. And it doesn't sound like it would be very effective in terms of like getting people excited about a piece of content. Tell me about that.
Yes. And I had a friend of mine who helps companies with their positioning and offers. He was like, wait a minute, your company's called House of Bold and you are pivoting to focus on research reports? Like, research reports aren't bold. Like, what's the connection? And I would say, yes, the kind of research reports you might be familiar with are usually dry and bland, and sometimes they commit even bigger sins, which we'll get into. But research reports for sure can be bold. It's all about the foundation that you build your data on and the story that you tell. So it can be something that can really help B2B companies elevate their brand in the market. It can help them get press in really huge publications. And it can really help them do something most of them really want to do, which is become seen as a thought leader that others want to partner with. So that's why they matter, and it's worth the investment if you do it right, because it is a big investment in both time and money. And if you do it wrong, it could actually damage your trust and credibility.
What are ways that you're seeing it being done wrong right now?
So I've been referring to it as hogwash research. And I say that your buyers are smart, especially in B2B, and they've seen hogwash research before and they're hip to it. Like, they're not falling for this crap. So what exactly is hogwash research? I was really thinking about this, and I've kind of broken it down into two big mistakes that I see companies making again and again. And the first one has to do with their research methodology. Because think about it. A lot of times these companies are going it on their own, and they're marketers. They're not researchers. They don't know really what it takes to form a testable hypothesis. They don't know about, data quality checks to, weed out bots and all those people who are just rushing through the survey to get a reward. They might not understand about writing questions a certain way so that you're not leading respondents toward a predetermined answer that perfectly suits your narrative. There's all sorts of different ways that companies make mistakes. Usually they don't realize they're making these mistakes. They're not trying to be deceitful. They just don't know. And I call that sloppy methodology. And sloppy methodology can really damage your brand's credibility. If you think about it, you've probably heard the expression garbage in, garbage out. So if you are building your story on a foundation of garbage data that can't be trusted, you're now spreading misinformation into the world, which is likely at odds with what you're trying to do as a brand, which is helping to elevate the entire industry. The second one is a little less innocent, and it's a little more, I don't want to say deceitful, because I've been guilty of this too when I started out. So I just want to put it on the table and say that it's something that as marketers, we're trained to kind of prove our POV and create these really persuasive stories that are designed to sell. But that's kind of at odds with what it really is to do research. A research project really exists to surface the truth. It's to test a hypothesis, and it's really for the greater good. But what happens is a lot of times brands put out these reports that kind of feel too good to be true, right? Kind of like sends up red flags. You're like, wait a minute, how could every single finding come back in this company's favor? How come they're not sharing their survey questions verbatim? How come they're just kind of summarizing what they asked? Are they just, reporting on the 10 findings that came back to help them prove their POV? Are they burying the rest? Were they asking leading questions? Well, we'll never know because they're not even putting the questions verbatim into the report. So that's what I call selective reporting, and that can really damage trust. So on the one hand, you have your sloppy methodology, which can damage your credibility, and your selective reporting, which can damage your trust.
So do you recommend folks do share the bad news as well? How do you recommend it? What if the research report finds more bad news than good news? Like, that's a couple different questions for you. I'd love to hear what you think.
I mean, it really depends on what's your hypothesis, because there's different goals of having a report out there, right? It might be like a benchmarking report. It might be a report that really tries to dig into your point of view, like your narrative that you're saying. Maybe you want to have some data points to support that. And those are the cases where typically people want to cherry pick the findings so they can say, oh, look, like this report perfectly showed that everything we've been saying for the last year is completely true. So I would say a lot of times some findings do come back that are contradictory. I think if most or all are coming back contradictory, either your POV and your talk track is all wrong, or maybe you had sloppy methodology and you can't trust the data. So I would dig into that either way. But if it's like the average report, yeah, probably you'll get something back that will be contradictory. And I wouldn't just toss it out. I would use it as an opportunity to build trust and credibility. So what you can do is partner with credible external experts, maybe even customers, and run it by them. Like, ask them to weigh in on these findings. And what you often find is that there will be some sort of root cause or some sort of nuance underneath the surface that explains why this might be happening. And more often than not, you're being honest. You're showing that this came back and you're not afraid to show it, even though it's contradictory. But in the end of the day, it's really not that bad because there's all these outside factors and there's all this nuance that actually makes it less contradictory.
Now, I want to ask you about a specific example from the last year, working with a client or for your own business, where you kind of walk me through the steps of what you did to put together research reports, any kind of roadblocks you ran into. I'm just really curious to kind of hear behind the scenes of how the process worked for a specific example, and then what was the outcome?
I'm glad you used the word process, because if you don't have a tight process, it can seem really overwhelming. One thing that I did back when I was in-house, I worked at the Predictive Index for 3.5 years. We did a lot of research reports. We did them for multiple audiences, several a year. And every single time that we did a report, I would update my project management template, which I uploaded into Asana, with learning so that next time we wouldn't make the same mistakes. Because there's always some mistake that you make every single time. You're like, man, I wish I would have done this, or man, it would have been better if we took this step. So one thing I did was to make this template publicly available. And it's something that I give to my clients, many of whom have never done a research report before. So they really are going into it not only, being unsure about how to build or how to design a survey, but also being unsure how to manage all the many moving pieces on the back end. So I think the process piece is super important. And to answer your question about how the project runs and how the process goes, that's kind of like the North Star. It's a central source of truth. It's divided up into different kind of parts of the process. So first, we're talking about like the strategy. So we have a strategy workshop where we're really talking about what are our goals for having this report? Like, are we trying to get PR? Are we trying to, create a piece of sales enablement? There's all different goals that people are trying to achieve with their report. So we're getting clear on that. We're getting clear on our data source. Like, where are we going to even get this data? And a lot of people don't always know. If you have a big email list, maybe you want to survey your list. But if you do, you have to be sure to be super transparent that this is your own email list, because when you survey your list, that doesn't accurately reflect the realities of the market, because those folks have been influenced by you. They've been getting your emails. They've been following you on social media. Maybe they've been using your product. And so just talking about data source and how we are going to not only choose that data source, but also lead with transparency and lead with rigor of methodology and just getting everyone super aligned. During that meeting, I will also walk them through the project management template that I managed so we can see the entire process step by step. We can see who's going to be owners of each process, who's going to be accountable, responsible, and then my clients could just upload that right into their project management platform. So it really gets less stressful. So then once you go through that kind of planning phase, you move into the next big piece of the project, which is the data collection and analysis. So it kind of goes from there and just moves step by step through the process and just making sure everyone's clear on what has to happen and when.
So getting clear on the data, who, and transparency with who you're reaching out to, your primed list versus maybe a third party list or somebody else's list.
You can collaborate with another co-marketing partner. You could survey their list, co-author the report. You could look at an existing data set. Sometimes companies do that when they're looking at websites. Like, let's say I want to do research on how many websites have or give you the ability to book time on a sales rep's calendar. That, for example, would be a publicly available data set. Whereas some companies want to use their own product data. I have a lot of clients that want to do that. They're like, hey, we have all this really interesting data about how our users are, using our software to take different actions as well as their outcomes. And that's another great thing that you can do, especially if your goal is really that sales enablement piece. You really want to use it to kind of work some warm leads in your pipeline, to move deals along. Sometimes a report that looks at your product data can be like really amazing for that.
Well, can you speak to kind of a recent example you've had with a client where what the outcome was? Like what, was there an ROI? What does that look like? Is it a long-term play? Is it really about how well you can distribute the results? I'm sure there's a lot of nuance to each different report and how the ROI turns out, but I'd be curious about a specific example you've seen.
There is a lot of nuance. Like you said, you hit the nail on the head there, but I would say that you should be able to see two outcomes. One is short-term and one is longer-term. The short-term outcome is that if you did really well with your launch day planning and preparation, you should see some sort of press pickups, right? Because you are priming the market, you're letting them know about your research, and you are framing your research in a way that it's press-worthy. It's not just like dry research. It's like, wow, it has a newsworthy angle. There's something in here that's juicy and interesting to an external party, as well as the fact that it's built on a rigorous methodology. This isn't just some bullshit study. Like, you're actually putting out valid insights into the world. So I would say if you get that right, you should be able to see some press right away. As an example, one of my more recent clients, on the first day that their report went live, it got covered in a publication with like 2.6 million daily readers. So that was like a huge win for them. And on the back end, it usually takes a couple months to see any real pipeline impact where you can attribute it to the report. But the same client, after 3 months, and I always check in at the 3-month mark and say, hey, let's touch base and see how things are going. And they told me that they were very excited. The report page was one of the most highly visited pages on their site. And more importantly, they had seen that it influenced a few enterprise deals and a few renewals, which is huge. Anyone who sells at the enterprise level, they know how hard it is to move those deals along. They're big, they take a lot of time. So if the report was that one thing that helped people see, hey, this brand, I can see them as a thought leader. There's someone that I can partner with. I trust them. They seem credible. It can help move those deals along. So that's just a recent example.
Any tips for how to package up your report in a way that is really appealing to your target audience? Should it be gated? Should it be only available by talking to a sales rep? Tell me about that.
Definitely don't make it available by talking to a sales rep. I think that if your true motive is to advance the conversation in the industry and to really get your thought leadership out there and become seen as a thought leader, I think you really want to get it into as many hands as possible, right? So for me, I'm always going to encourage you to have it out there as readily as possible. It doesn't mean you can't gate a portion of the report. Like, perhaps you decide to put some of the report on a landing page and people can scroll down, they can get the gist, maybe they can read the executive summary and a few good findings. And then if they're really engaged, then maybe you put some sort of scroll gate where they can choose to download the PDF or unlock the rest of the report. I think that's a good compromise. I'm not saying all gated reports are bad. I had an experience where we had a report with a really, really good headline and a really compelling H2 and like a little paragraph. And that report was one of the most successful reports of all time. I think because of the topic and the content and the timing, but that report drove like hundreds of thousands of dollars in closed won revenue. And it was completely gated. So that's worth mentioning too. There's really never like a right or wrong answer 100% of the time. I think that's why it's so important to sit down with the report strategy kickoff and really get aligned on all of this. And something worth mentioning as well, if your report does talk about your product data, like perhaps you combined product data with a survey, so you can compare and contrast people that use a product like yours as opposed to people in the same ICP, the same demographics and firmographics who don't use a product like yours. That can be seen as really salesy. So there is a way to present the report initially so that it gets, picked up by press. And then maybe down the road, you use it more as sales enablement. And you're not changing any of the content. It's just a matter of the framing of it at the top of the report. When you're handing it over to someone, they're like, oh, now I get it a little bit more than I would if I was just reading about it in a magazine. So there's some ways that you can kind of reshape the report for different audiences too, without changing the content and being dishonest, because I don't believe in that.
Right. Well, you're making it more relevant for different audiences. Yeah, that makes sense. You do that with any kind of content. I do that all the time. Like, I'm doing an event here for in-house marketers. I talk about that differently than I would if I were talking to a founder. And any other tips for a successful ROI on a report? Once, assuming somebody's done all the good work, they've asked the right questions, no leading questions, things like that. Assuming that's all figured out, any other tips for that launch phase to make it more successful?
The launch phase itself, yeah, there's a lot of things you can do. I think if you are a sales-led organization, you really need to make sure that you're enabling your sales team, that they know how to talk about these findings, that they understand what people have engaged with before they reach out to request a demo, if the report was one of the things that they interacted with along their customer journey. So that's a big piece that I help companies work with, is a sales enablement piece. And then also, if you're going to launch on social media, just making sure that you're not launching to crickets. You're not just posting it from your company page, and you're not just having one or two people in your company talk about it. Make it be a big deal. Find other people that have an audience, leverage their audience. There's a lot of different interesting ways you can work with co-marketing partners. There's a lot of different ways you can get your ideas out there. Maybe there's some webinars or live events or podcasts. There's all these different things that you can plan for around the time of your launch to really get the most eyeballs on your message. If not, to the actual report page where they're downloading the report. And at the end of the day, I honestly don't care if you read the entire report top to finish, because most people aren't going to sit there and spend a whole hour and a half reading a very long report. I care that they get our main talking points and that they remember us for the things that we want to be remembered for. So that down the road, when the time comes and they're building their consideration set, they think, oh yeah, that brand is relevant for that thing. And oh yeah, I know what they do. And that's really the goal. The goal is not necessarily getting them to sit down and consume the whole report.
You want that association more than anything else, regardless of how much of the content they consume. Any opinions about the role of thought leadership and the role of a report in terms of this angle? So let me be clear. So one of the problems we often see, I see personally, this is my experience, is that I'm consuming a lot of content and I completely forget who the author or the company was that taught me that. So one of the ways I talk about it is I'm learning all sorts of stuff, but no one's getting the credit. Very few people. And so it's really important to have an attributable source, a way to come back to, yeah, I learned it from XYZ. Any thoughts on that perspective, how you really, consider that part of it? I don't expect you to have, but I was just curious if you've ever thought about that.
Yes, I have. After 10 plus years in B2B marketing, I have. So I think that a lot of times part of that is really helping people to understand the problems that they're experiencing. Sometimes it can help to name the problem. And I think that when you do that within a report and you're using the supporting evidence to really just drive that home, that can help, right? So let's say, you were interested in research reports and you're like, oh, I'm not sure who's been that person that's been talking about reports, because you might have heard a little fact here, or maybe there was some basic information here. And imagine now if I had taught you, it's not just about creating a report. It's about creating a believable research report because most companies are putting out hogwash research. Hogwash research has two big mistakes. They have sloppy methodology. They have selective reporting. And what happens when you have sloppy methodology? I'm just building this whole story and you're like, oh yeah, like that makes a lot of sense. So down the road, 3 months from now, if you're ready to, have a research report and you're like, who's that person? Oh yeah, Erin, because she wasn't just regurgitating the same tips about creating research reports. She was helping me understand the problem that exists in the market, a problem that I'm afraid to make. I see others make it. I've seen this hogwash research. I think it's bullshit. It makes me super skeptical. So yeah, it must be true that that's the same for others. And that's how you start to build that association. And you can do it, of course, with naming the problem, and you can also do it on the back end. I think a lot of people have experience or at least understanding of what it is to try to build a category or create a category. It's really hard. And that would involve the analysts adopting your category. That's when you know you have truly succeeded and created a category. But what's a little more attainable for people would be just coining a term that sticks in people's head that helps them remember you. Someone that I think most of us marketers and content marketers especially know is Amanda from SparkToro, and she coined the term zero-click content. And that's not only super relevant to what most of us are experiencing, trying to get people onto our websites to click through from the LinkedIn, to click through from the SERP and click to view our website. It's harder than it was before because now we need to create zero-click content. So she was able to coin that term, and it's helped her and the company she works for, SparkToro, to really own that conversation. So you can do that outside of original research, but you can also use original research to either launch that term, name that problem, or just grow people's awareness about it.
I like that. That's a factor to consider in your launch. Is there a coinable term we should be aiming for, or that can come out of this? I've never thought about that before.
And that's why it's like you should go in with a testable hypothesis. Like imagine if you go in like, we have to do it this way, and then you all get disproven. Like sometimes maybe by doing the work, it's just like any kind of market research you do, right? If you have some messaging, I hope you're showing it to some people you trust, some people that fit your ICP, and getting their feedback, and then helping use their feedback to shape your messaging. And you should always be doing that, right? So that it's getting better and better and more resonant over time. So I think that you should approach it that way as well. So get it out there, use their feedback. Don't just bury all of the contradictory findings, like use that to make your story stronger.
Well, I have a lot more questions I could be asking you, but we're at time. And Erin, where can somebody learn about you and what you're doing with research reports?
As I mentioned, I'm the only Erin Balsa on LinkedIn. So the first and easiest way is just to search for my name. And then you can also go to my website, which is houseofbold.com. And that's spelled HAUS, houseofbold.com.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you for being here, Erin.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.